went online to switch your car insurance to Progressive so you could save money. But then you saw a friend request from an old summer camp buddy. And now here you are, clicking through photos of his kickball team from 2011. Looks like they won the championship that year. Then he moved to Tulsa. Oh, a new tattoo. Yes, they said it was easy to save hundreds on car insurance with Progressive, but they forgot about the rest of the internet. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. National average savings by new customer surveyed who saved in 2019.
At Community Coffee, we've been making great tasting coffee for over 100 years. But what makes us different isn't just how long we've been around. It's how far we're willing to go in pursuit of the perfect cup. We select only the finest beans and use over 4 generations of family roasting experience to give you the richest, most delicious coffee around. Find Community Coffee at your local grocery store or visit communitycoffee.com to order some today.
Good evening, everybody. And if you're just tuning in, you're listening live to the Angel Rock. I'm your host, Lorilei Potvin. I do want to remind you, if you are listening, please tune into our YouTube channel, United Public Radio, or just UPRN. That's where the chat is. You can join in. I like to involve the people that come into the chat, make them part of the show. If you've got any questions, comments. If you've never been to my show before, I'll tell you a little bit about it. I also want to welcome all our returning listeners that do tune in every week and support the show. My show, The Angel Rock, is basically what I like to do is cover everything under the paranormal spectrum, I say. Now, when I say paranormal, that just means nothing that you may seem necessarily in the mainstream, although that is changing. For myself, I'm in Canada. I am a psychic medium. I'm also a crystal Reiki energy healer, an Akashic Records practitioner, a spiritual teacher and mentor, and I'm also a registered nurse. Now, tonight, we have a very interesting guest. I have to thank our mutual friend, Gavin Lee Davies. He's been on the show himself. He's over in Wales. He was on a few months ago, actually, and he sends me the most fantastic guest of one we have this evening. I'm going to read his bio that Gavin does my job all the time for me. It makes it so easy. He puts conversation topics, everything you might need, your guest picture, the bio. I just love him. And I should give a shout out to Joe Montaldo, who owns United Public Radio Network. He also has multiple shows on the network, great ones. I also want to say he makes my job so easy. I just get to sit and talk. He does all the hard work and does the producing. So thank you, Joe. Now, our guest tonight, of course, his bio moved on me just as I was about to read it here. So hang on. I got to scroll through this long email I have here. Okay, anytime now. That's what I get from moving my hands around when I talk. So never mind, I have a backup just in case. I did that. It never fails. So our guest tonight is Lionel Friedber, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. He is an Emmy Award-winning film and TV producer and writer. Lionel grew up in South Africa and began his career at the first TV station in Central Africa in northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, in 1961. He worked as a director of photography on 18 feature films and wrote, produced, and directed for the National Geographic, PBS, and National Broadcasting Cable networks, including the Discovery Channel, A&E, and the History Channel. He is also a New York Times bestselling author. He is based in Los Angeles, California. We're going to be talking about his new book tonight. Welcome, Lionel. I'm so glad to have you on here.
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really delighted to be with you guys tonight. Thank you.
I'm so glad. I was telling you quickly, I should get over to YouTube here. So I'm a little bit kerfuffled here because we weren't sure. Thank God Joe was working his butt off today. He got home in time to put my show on. We didn't know. I didn't want to tell you anything, Lionel, but Joe managed to get home in time. But normally we have a host chat that 1 week we do politics and the next week is the paranormal. So we usually go right up to my show. So now I'm all discombobulated here. I do want to go over to YouTube. Like I said, I was reminding our listeners because that is where the chat is. And we do have regular people that pop over there and ask great questions. We were talking about weather because you're in Los Angeles and I'm in Thunder Bay in northwestern Ontario in Canada, the difference. You were saying you came to Canada first when you emigrated from South Africa?
Yes, the first time I came to North America was to Canada. I emigrated basically to Montreal, but I traveled all over Canada. It was wonderful. I love your country very much.
Well, yeah, I have to say, I've always been a Canadian, obviously, but I've traveled and I have loved Canada, but things have really, really, really changed here. I never thought I would live to see the day. The province next to me, you will know where that is, in Quebec,
Yeah.
there in martial law. We are actually in a lockdown, just like the beginning. And then the province on the other side of me, Manitoba, it was even illegal to shop for Christmas presents. So things have really changed over here.
No,
So,
yeah, but that doesn't apply only to Canada. I think the whole world is going through that
absolutely.
kind of trauma. I mean, even here in LA, which is
Mhm.
a pretty free and easy city,
Yes.
as is California. But we're all in the same boat. I mean, we really are facing very, very difficult and dark times, and I hear you, but it's worldwide now.
Yes, you are right. You are definitely right. And but that's another show we can talk about. That's usually the type of things we would have been talking about tonight on the host chat. It was Joe has a show he calls The Centralist to try and stay in the middle, but we talk about these kind of things that are coming up with politics or what's in the news and things like that. So I
Mm.
want to welcome Zach Mann. He's one of our regular supporters of my shows. He's here. I appreciate it. And UPRN. And just to remind our listeners, we do have a membership for those of you that sign up under our YouTube channel. What that does is help support our network, but what you get out of that is extra content. So I think there's between 40 and 50 of us hosts on the United Public Radio Network, and all of us, I still haven't done mine, I need to, but we're all putting extra content up there for people that support the network and get a membership. So things like some people are teaching classes, or you may see some interviews that you're not going to see on the regular network. So check that out. We'd love to see you join up there. And Zach is one of our subscribers, so he helps the network out. So we really appreciate that, Zach. And he asks great questions too. You know what? I was reading, I have to tell you, you said a cat makes a home at the end of your email. You must be
Yeah,
a fellow animal lover.
very much so.
You know why I bring it up? And I was so excited because I know you had mentioned you were from Africa and in your bio. This is the first time we're speaking. There is a lady that I follow from South Africa, Anna Breitenbach, I think her name is. And
Hmm.
she is an animal communicator. Have you heard of her before?
No, but there are a few people like that I know of in South Africa. Yes.
Mhm. Incredible lady. I just watched an interview with her. She didn't get in the ocean. And actually, there was a documentary made about her
Mm.
that to prove that she actually was communicating with animals. And she actually interviewed the great white sharks to find out why they were
Mm-hmm.
attacking humans. It was quite interesting.
Yes, I'm quite sure. Oh, absolutely. Yes. It's fascinating, and in fact, I know a woman in South Africa who has an extraordinary level of communication with rhinos. She saves
Wow.
rhinos.
Mhm.
She rescues them because rhinos are an endangered species today. People,
Absolutely.
and she's a remarkable woman. And then I made a film because I also worked on a wonderful series for the Animal Planet some years ago called Growing Up. And these are all about wild young animals who were either rejected by their mothers
Okay.
or whose mothers were killed either in the wild or for various
Right.
reasons they had to be raised by humans. And this particular woman that I'm talking about now, Rita Milio, she took care of baby baboons. Now,
Ooh.
baboons in certain areas of South Africa, particularly where there are lots of farms and things, are regarded as vermin, and
Yes.
they shoot them. And so there are lots of little baby baboons running around without mummies, and she rescues them. And she had the most extraordinary relationship with baby baboons. I went and I spent a few weeks with her at her rescue place in South Africa
Oh,
in the northern
wow.
province. And it was just amazing. It was just wonderful. Of course, none of that surprises me at all, because as I write in my book, I believe we are all connected. We just don't know
Yes.
how to
Mhm.
utilize that capability.
Mhm.
Uh, but it exists, and that's what these people are doing, and it's just absolutely wonderful. So I'm not surprised that there are people like that around. They're just wonderful. I know a number of people here who talk to horses
Mhm.
in LA.
Mhm.
And one of my grandchildren who lives in England, she has now developed this incredible love of horses. She's a total animal person, and she has a communication with the horse that she rides. I mean, they know one another and they communicate with one another, and it doesn't surprise me. We can all do that. My cat and I are. I mean, my cat is my best. No one understands me like my cat.
It's true. And I should tell you, I always warn people. I don't know if it's me being up in Canada, so I apologize if I start to speak over you. It'll seem like there's a pause. I think my Skype is a little bit delayed, so I will apologize in advance. It's really funny, though, that I'm getting goosebumps. I always say that's my sign for truth, and it's not cold in here. But that's why you were reading my mind, I swear, because Anna actually in this documentary would go and lie in a rock. And like you said, baboons are considered vermin in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
She would lay there and the baboons would just never seen her before, walk up to her, start grooming her. She would get them to move out of populated areas, even though humans are taking over populated areas that once belonged to them.
Yep.
And like even the males that are so territorial, no problem, come in. And the same thing, my oldest son, actually both my children communicate with, one of them's just popping in, communicate with animals ever since they were little.
Yeah.
So I hear you. Now, the name of your book, and I want to read this for people. Give me one sec here. We got a dog coming in here. Animals, kids, or grandkids, like you said. We're all connected. So your book is called Forever in My Veins, How Film Led Me to the Mysterious World of the African Shaman. And when Gavin sent me all this info about you, there were so many things that resonated with me. The cat part caught me right away because I'm an animal lover. But then I have studied near-death experiences as well for 4 years. So that's mentioned. Where do we start? Like, I guess at the beginning, how you got involved, right?
Gosh, I mean, we can start. You can plunge in anywhere you like. But maybe where we should begin this little story is at the beginning. And that is, let me just say to your listeners, I grew up in South Africa. I was born there. And I grew up during the apartheid era. In other words, during that horrific racist divide that existed in South Africa for many, many years. And only went away after Nelson Mandela was released from prison under President Frederick de Klerk, who eventually dismantled the apartheid system, which is now history. But of course, there's still huge discrepancies because there's an economic divide now between white and black. However, I grew up during the worst times when apartheid was an institutionalized system. It was legal. It was the law. White and black did not meet. If you knew a black person, the only black person you would know would be the person who was the servant in your home or who worked in the local grocery store or something like that. There was no communication between those two societies whatsoever.
That brings me to tears. I'm sorry, but it does.
Yeah.
It really does.
So, we were all privileged whites, whether we were, middle class or lower class or whatever it was. And there was a kind of class system in South Africa amongst the white community as well as there are in many parts of the world. And then there was the black community. And so even if you were a middle class individual, as I was, and I was an only child, we all had servants and we all had nannies to take care of us. And so I had many nannies as a child, and they basically brought me up. When I was a little tyke, a little 2-3-year-old, she would strap me on her back, put a rug around herself, and tie me onto her back, and she'd go sweeping the floors or polishing the floors or doing the cooking the dinner, whatever else, and hum lullabies to me and sing me to sleep while I was on her back, like sitting in a papoose, if you like, similar sort of situation. So I remember those women extremely well, and I have extraordinarily fond memories of all of them. But when I was about maybe 6 or 7 years old, we were living in a small town just to the east of Johannesburg. It was called, the town was, its name is Kempton Park. It's about 20 miles to the east of Johannesburg. So it's part of that big metropolitan area, Johannesburg. Lots of gold mines and factories, very industrialized area. Today, the big international airport is where Kempton Park is, the Oliver Tambo International Airport. Anyway, it was her day off, I think it must have been, because she said to me that day, she said, "I'm going to visit a friend this afternoon. Do you want to come with me?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. I'd love to do that." So I went with her down the road to see a friend of hers who, like she, had a little tiny room in the backyard, a minuscule closet-sized place. With next to it was a tiny little, toilet, a scratch in the floor, and a cold shower. That's what they had. That's all they had. Could talk about Spartan environments in which to live. That's where they lived. But they worked in the White Houses, and they did all the hard work in keeping white families clean and alive and fed
Bringing
and whatever else.
Bringing up their children.
And bringing up their children. Yes, exactly. And so one day, this lady said to me, her name was Maminka. That was my nickname for her. And she said, I'm going to visit a friend. You want to come with me? I said, yeah, absolutely. So I went with her down the road. We walked, and she took me to another backyard of a house, just half a block or so away from where we lived, into the backyard where her friend lived and worked. And her friend also had a day off. I think Thursdays was the traditional half day off that these servants had back in those days, if I remember correctly.
Half day. Wow.
So we went into the backyard to see her friend, and outside her little tiny room in the back were one or two people waiting. And I said to my nanny, what are they waiting for? And she said, because they're waiting to see her because she's also a doctor. And that made no sense to me whatsoever. What do you mean she's a doctor? I mean, for me, a doctor was a guy who arrived in a car carrying a black bag and, had a stethoscope around his neck. So what does she mean? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, she will show you when we go inside her room. And eventually, these two people ahead of us went inside this woman's room. They were there for about 20 minutes, and they came out carrying a little brown paper bag with something inside it. I have no idea what. And they left, and then we went inside her room. And she was very sweet and very kind, and she told us to sit on the floor. And around her room were all these very, very strange objects. There were shelves full of little containers and bottles and jars and what else, containing all sorts of weird things that I did not recognize. Feathers and skins and powders and pebbles and herbs of various kinds. I had no idea what they were, but it was fascinating. The smells were extraordinary in this room, in addition to the candle wax that she used, because there was no electric light in her room, of course. And I said to her, what kind of doctor are you? And she said, oh, you want to know? I will show you. Sit on the floor. So I sat on the floor, and on the floor was a little grass mat. And in the middle of the grass mat was a little animal skin bag. And she picked it up and she shook it, and it had a sort of clinking sound to it. And then she turned it upside down, and she spilt the contents on this little grass mat. And she said, these are the things that I use which tell me what I have to do to make people better. And what those little things were little bones, not large, knuckle bones, small bones from small animals, from a goat. Now, every shaman in South Africa and in many other parts of Africa as well, their traditional bone set consists of bones from very specific animals, but they can add other bones and pebbles and trinkets and bits and pieces to it, whatever they need. Because the paradigm there is these are instruments these are little things that fall on the grass floor. And it is believed that their ancestors manipulate the way they fall, whatever pattern they make on the grass mat is created by the ancestors. And then these people interpret the way these items have fallen. They can read the bones, so to speak. Yep. And so she said to me, I put the bones here, and then I look at the bones and they tell me what to do for my patient. And I was fascinated by all of this. And she said, and then I prescribe muti. Now, muti is the term that it's used today, even now in South Africa, by these people. Muti is the name for medicine. And it's traditional medicines. It's compound medicines that they make themselves from all these little objects on these shelves around their room. She explained all this to me, and, she took about 10 minutes to do this, and I was absolutely fascinated. Anyway, and then my nanny and her, they were yakking away for about a half an hour, and they had a good time. And I think we had some tea or coffee together, and eventually it was time to go, and we went home, and I was really fascinated by what I'd seen that day. And I said to my parents that night, I said, I saw a nanny today who was also a doctor. And of course, my parents dismissed it immediately because in the white community, people who did this were regarded as witch doctors, and they were frowned upon. I mean, whites looked very down their noses at this. And they regarded them they called them, well, this derogatory term, witch doctor, which was totally incorrect. But I mean, even Hollywood made movies about, witch doctors. It was the
It's still
accepted term.
today, Lionel. It's still today,
I
even with
know.
what I do. It's
Yes,
still today. People
till
do
today.
not, but they don't understand or take the time to hear about it like you did with the curiosity of a child.
Mm,
And this is what's led to where you're going with the story, right? Because it
yeah,
probably always stuck with you, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, having experienced that as a very, very small child, I accepted the fact that this went on, and I didn't question it. I was told not to discuss it. My parents knew absolutely nothing about it, of course, and none of my friends knew anything about it. None of the white people that I knew anything about it. But my nanny and I discussed it quite often, and my nanny said, I went down to her. She went down to her to get medicine, muti, for a stomach ache, for a headache, for this, for that. And a lot of the servants that we had, if they were ill, my folks would say, would you like to, can we take you to the clinic? Can we get the doctor? No, 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 it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. We will see the sangoma. And the sangoma is the word they used for these shamans, these herbalist healers and so on. But the role of these people, these sangomas, these shamans, were not just to cure illnesses and to diagnose what might be wrong with the patient. They had many, many roles in society. They could talk to the dead. They could see into the future. They could find out if you had lost something. They could find out where the item may be. They could do all kinds of things. So they were diviners, they were healers, they were soothsayers. They wore many hats. They did many things. It was an amazingly varied way of helping their clients or patients or whatever you want to call them. And it took years and years and years for them to become officially ordained as one of these sangomas. They would sit at the feet of an expert for years and years and years. And it's quite a long and involved process before they are actually told that, all right, now you're a sangoma, you can go and do healing on your own.
I have a question. I have one
Yes.
question that's in my mind. So I always, when you start telling, I'm utterly fascinated. I love hearing about stuff like this because I think it's so important. It's a lost art. And like you say, we're all connected, all the training that goes into this. What did they accept as payment, or was there payment? Because even with energy, right? There should be an equal exchange of some type. So with people being that poor, what did they do?
Oh, everybody got paid. It was not very much money, the people paid
No,
them
but
what.
I mean, that's a sangoma. If you went to
Yes,
see the sangoma and you got some muti, would
yes.
you have to pay, or what would you give
No,
in
no,
in exchange?
you would pay. It
You would
it was
pay?
it
Okay.
was requirement. The ancestors, and I know because I know lots of sangomas now, including a white guy here who's a very dear friend of mine. He's a surgeon, by the way, a white man
I love it.
who became ordained in the way of the shaman in
I love
Africa.
it.
He went back to learn their healing methods, and he went back to learn about how they found all these incredible cures from nature using leaves and grasses and just
Yeah.
natural elements. So he studied this, but he's a surgeon, and he said that it's all about the ancestors. Remember that. It's all about the ancestors. The way these people do their work is through the guidance of their ancestral spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you connect with the ancestors are through the bones. You throw the bones, the ancestors impact or influence the way the bones fall. And you look at these bones and then oh, my granny or my grandfather or whoever it may be is telling me to do X, Y, and Z. And this is how they do that. And a friend who's now an ordained sangoma, he said that he was told by his guiding spirit, his African spirit, who basically
Yes.
helped him on the road, said, you have to charge because there is a payment. We don't do this for nothing. It's fair exchange. And so, but I mean, those days it was like no money at all. It was tiny. It was less than the equivalent of $1 that these people would pay. And you never pay the sangoma directly. You never hand money to money, hand to hand. You would take the money, whether it was a coin or a banknote, and just put it underneath that little grass mat. You just leave it there.
Okay.
And leave out of respect. Money was part of it, but don't let it interfere with the vibe or the mood of the event. So just gently stick it underneath. And often when I've had my bones read, and I've had that done dozens of times now, every time I go in and I see a sangoma, I take a couple of dollars or rands if you're in South Africa, and you just gently slip it underneath the grass mat and you say nothing, and that's it. And when you leave, the sangoma finds that. So yeah, there is payment involved. So now,
well, I understand that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, I understand that, because even with the work that I do, or anybody else, there's this big thing about people will say, well, I don't charge, it's for free, and that's fine, there's no judgment there, but everything's energy, right, on this planet. So whether it's money or anything, like, do a random act of kindness for somebody else if you're not able to, but something to keep the energy exchange. So that's why I asked you. Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, certainly, absolutely, sure. So let's jump ahead now in time. We were talking then around about the year 1950, probably, when this incident happened. I'm now 76, so I was about 6 years old when this
you event. Don't look 76.
Well, that's because I'm a vegan. I've been a vegan for years and years, and so I don't eat other critters, and I can tell you, it makes a huge difference to your health. But that's another story. Anyway, so in 1960, I had finished my education in South Africa. I was an only child. And my father, who was originally from Latvia, he was an immigrant to South Africa, married my mother. She was South African. He was very disenchanted with the apartheid system. And my mother sort of lived it because she grew up with it. My father found it really very, very hard to deal with. And that was the primary reason why he decided to leave the country. So where would you go? He wasn't a wealthy man at all. In fact, by trade, he was a watchmaker. Those are the days when watches were mechanical, not electronic like they are today, So he would fix watches. That was his life. He learned the trade in Europe.
That's a tedious lost art, because to watch somebody work on that kind of little tiny piece of machinery and all the gears, I think you have to have a knack and a gift for it, and it's fascinating to watch if you can still find somebody that does that kind of work.
Well, of course, those people who do have fancy watches like, the Rolexes and whatever else, those are all mechanical watches. They would need a watchmaker. And I will never forget, my father did extra work at night at home. And I can smell his workbench, the benzene and the fuels of the little cleansing fluids that he would use to clean the watch parts, the springs and the little tiny, 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 tiny screws and cogwheels. He lived in this miniature world. And, he'd have some music going in the background, and that's what he did. He lived in that tiny world. Because of that, my father could fix anything, no matter how big or small, because he lived in this tiny world where you put these precision pieces together. It was, as you say, an art. Anyway, he took a job at a tiny little jewelry store in a place called Northern Rhodesia, which was way, way, way up to the north of South Africa. It was right at the border of the Congo, the Belgian Congo. Now, the Belgian Congo the Belgians had just given up the Congo. It had become independent. And the first Belgian war, the first Congo war had just broken out there. So chaos was.
You went online to switch your car insurance to Progressive so you could save money. But then you saw a friend request from an old summer camp buddy. And now here you are, clicking through photos of his kickball team from 2011. Looks like they won the championship that year. Then he moved to Tulsa. Oh, a new tattoo. Yes, they said it was easy to save hundreds on car insurance with Progressive, but they forgot about the rest of the internet. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average savings by new customer surveyed who saved in 2019.
15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
Is that Shakespeare?
Nope, it's Geico.
Yeah, that's Shakespeare from one of his unpublished works. Oh, it be not for awakening. Nay, giveth thou the berries. For 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
Nope, it's from Geico, because they help save people money.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but Geico got it from Shakespeare.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
Reigning supreme in the Congo. But on this side of the fence in Northern Rhodesia, it was peace and quiet because it was a British colony. And it was the tail end of the British Empire. England was giving away all its colonies, giving them independence. But my father decided to take a job in Northern Rhodesia because it suited him well. It was a small town in a mining community. He was quite happy to do that, and so he moved up there. And when my parents decided to go up there, I said, I'm going with you. And they said, are you out of your mind? You stay here. You go to university. You get yourself a degree. You get yourself a life. I had no interest in that. And I'll tell you why. Because when I was about 7 years old, maybe even less than that, my mother began taking me to see the movies. And I fell in love with the movies. And I fell in love with Hollywood movies. And I particularly fell in love with adventure movies like King Solomon's Mines and The African Queen and all the Tarzan movies and all that, right? So when I was 11 years old, a cousin of mine gave me a used movie camera. Film. This is long before the days of video, of course. And so I had this little camera and I was making films for my school sporting events, my friends' birthday parties, things like that. I was a big deal filmmaker when I was 11. So when my folks decided to move up to Northern Rhodesia, I thought, wow, I'm taking my camera with me. And I'm going to start making movies about Tarzan and the African Queen, King Solomon's Mines, and all those wonderful Rider Haggard adventure stories. That's what I want to do, Not knowing any better, I was, just fresh out of high school. Anyway, I went up there and followed my folks up there. And when I got up there, I was kind of horrified because there was nothing at all except a sea of bush and jungle and these tiny mining towns and a road connecting them, and that's it. And of course, African villages, spread throughout the bush. There was no film industry. There was no opportunity to make movies. And I thought, what have I done? Should I go back to South Africa? And I was toying around with the idea. Nevertheless, I ran around with my little camera, making films in nearby little African villages. Wonderful little 8mm films. I still have them. I can't show them because I don't have a projector anymore that'll run them. I have the projector, but I don't have the lamp, the bulb, the light. Yes, exactly.
You might have to talk about that because I've actually at one of the thrift shops here, they seem to once in a while get that kind of equipment. You tell me what you're looking for. I'm going to look for you when it reopens.
Well, Laura, listen, I live in LA. I live in Hollywood, right? So if you're going to find it anywhere, you'll find it here. Okay. And it's just nowhere available. It's just nobody makes that stuff anymore. It's just not available.
You never know. You know what? Everybody, I say this, everybody connects for a reason. That's not the only reason, the light, I mean, but you never know, right?
No, you're true. You're right. You're absolutely right. So after a couple of months of this, one day I was looking at the local newspaper. There was a little rag there that served the mining community. There were a string of these little mining towns, copper mines. All of them were copper mines, and the copper price was very high those days. So copper mining was a very lucrative industry at that point. And one day in the newspaper, there was a little ad looking for staff for a new television station, which was about to open. Now, there was no television when I got up there, remember. We're in the middle of the African nowhere. Yes. And here's an ad for staff for a television station.
Wow.
Well, I got into my little secondhand, my little used car that I'd bought, and I dashed over to this town where they were having auditions for staff. They weren't looking for any major creative people, of course, and they weren't looking for producers and directors and cameramen or engineers. All of those folks were coming from the UK to work at the station, and the station was still being built. The studio was still under construction, but they were looking for people to become, drivers and someone to look after the props in the props department and, menial things like that. And I begged the guy that interviewed me. I said, I will pay you to employ me. You've got to employ me. And anyway, he said, we'll let you know. And a couple of weeks go by, and eventually I get a letter, and they gave me a job. And my job was to look after the props in the props department, because at night we would have live advertising programs for local stores.
That's too funny.
The local grocery store had a special on Coca-Cola. So the presenter would hold up the Coke and say, This week you can buy a case of these for £3, that sort of thing.
And you had to grab all the props.
So all the props for those shows are what I looked after in the props department. Yeah.
Got to get your foot in the door somehow.
Exactly. And I was pretty inventive. And, I actually quite enjoyed it. But what I really wanted to do was to get behind one of those studio cameras.
Right.
And I went along to the studio manager one day and I said, Mr. Salmon, unless you put me behind one of those cameras, I'm leaving. Now, I knew that he wouldn't like the idea because I was good at what I did. I was fast. And I used to invent things, and I'll give you an example. One day there was a little ad for a local ice cream parlor, and so the presenter was going to talk about such and such an ice cream place is special this week, and I invented a way of making something look like ice cream. Now you wouldn't have ice cream in the studio because it would melt. So I had dish. Yeah. I took a white dishcloth. I put the white dishcloth in the dish. Remember, black and white television, not color.
Okay.
Then I took motor oil, car oil, engine oil, poured it over the top. That's the chocolate sauce. And I took a marble and put it on top of that. That was the cherry.
Wow.
Under the lights, it looked like a real ice cream. And they thought, wow, this guy is inventive. He's smart. He's resourceful. And I said, yeah, exactly. So put me behind a camera. And he said, all right, we'll let you do a test run. And they let me do a test on one of the morning educational broadcasts. We were doing broadcasts for local African schools in vernacular languages in the surrounding area, in the bush, because there weren't enough teachers to go around. And I was good on that camera. Why? Because I'd been making movies since I was 11. Yes. I knew how to compose an image, and I knew how to find an image quickly. And I was fast. So they said, okay, you're a studio cameraman. And that was the beginning of my career.
Wow.
And 1961 onwards, it was a gas. We would have educational broadcast in the morning, cultural programs in the afternoon for the local tribes in the area, lots of drumming and dancing in the studio. And at night, we'd have American and British programs for the white community on film, from Hollywood and from London. So we lived in this multicultural bubble in the middle of the African bush. It was extraordinary. Just amazing. Nevertheless, my dream was always to come to Hollywood and make films. And, for an ambition like that, when you work at a tiny bush television station, is very hard to accomplish. Nevertheless, I nurtured the dream. And then one day in 1964, all of us at the studio, and there were only about 30 or 40 people working there, all of us, the white staff, we all got pink slips because the station was nationalized by the government. And the reason for that is because Britain had given Northern Rhodesia its independence. It had now become the Republic of Zambia under a man by the name of Kenneth Kaunda, a very, very nice man. He'd been to the studio dozens of times for interviews. And I actually knew him by name. He knew me by name. But suddenly this pink slip arrives to say, you're all fired. You've all, in 6 months, you're out of here. And I thought, oh, my God, what am I going to do with my life? I had no idea what to do. So the next morning, I worked late at night. And then the next morning, I spoke to, because I was still living at home with my folks, and in a town called Ndola. And the next morning, I spoke to our servant, and his name was David Phiri. He was not much older than me, but he was our what they used to call the houseboy, polish the shoes, mow the lawn, wash the dishes, that kind of stuff. That's what they did, So I said to him, and he and I were buddies, and we got on extremely well. And his favorite topic was photography. He always wanted to open a photographic salon on his own. So he and I talked a lot about cameras and things. And the next morning I said to him, David, I said, a terrible thing has happened. He said, what? I told him, I said, I've been asked to leave the station. And in 6 months, I'm out of here. What am I going to do with my life? I don't want to go back to South Africa, primarily because of the apartheid system, even though there was already a pretty good, thriving film industry in South Africa. And I had kept my South African passport. I could have gone back. But I wasn't all that keen to do that. And so I said to him, I don't know what to do. And he thought for a moment. And he said to me, he spoke a very good English, and he said, all right, maybe I will find someone to help you. I will find someone who can help you decide what to do with your life. And, here's our servant who mows the lawn, and polishes my shoes, and he's telling me he's going to find me someone who tell me what to do with my life. Well, I trusted David implicitly, and I said, okay, babe, whatever you say, I'll do it. It comes the appointed day. He and I, in my little second-hand car, we went trundling along in the bush on a dirt road to a little outside of this town of Ndola. There was a little community of black families living. And at the edge of that, there was a single house, a tiny little house. And he told me to stop outside that house, which we did. And he went to the door, knocked on the door, and this ancient, very, very old lady came to the door. And she was all withered and extremely old. And her eyes were sort of, half blind. I have no idea what her age was. She spoke no English at all. She invited us into her home. I had no idea what this was all about. I trusted David, and I thought, whatever this is, it's going to be interesting, but I don't think it's going to tell me what to do with my life. Nevertheless, she invited us into her home, and when we went inside, I saw on the walls, all these shelves, the same sort of containers with objects that I'd seen as a child. It immediately resonated with me, and the smells resonated with me from my childhood. And I immediately thought, oh, she's got to be one of those healers, one of those diviners, one of those people who can read the bones. Maybe something's interesting is going to happen here today. And she told us to sit on the floor, and on the floor was a grass mat, and in the middle of the grass mat was a little animal skin bag. And I knew she was going to throw the bones for me, which is exactly what she did. She told me to open the bag, say my name into it, whisper my name into it, and then she sprinkled some snuff, which is ground up tobacco leaves, and then she shook the bag like this and poured it onto the mat, and she leaned over it like this, and she looked down at the bones, and the very first thing is that she pulled back as though she'd been startled by something, and I got a shock, and David got a shock, and she covered her eyes, and she said, I can't see anything, and David says, she said she's gone blind, she can't see anything. And I said, why? And, he asked her a question, and she said, these very, very bright lights are shining in my eyes. I can't see anything. And David says to me, she wants to know what these bright lights are. Well, when I heard that, I thought you'd better pay attention to what this woman is saying, because what she'd seen were the lights in the television station, in the studio.
Yes.
She had no idea who I was or what I had done for a living, any of those things. But the minute she said that, I knew she was seeing something that I was not seeing, that David was not seeing, but she was. Yeah. She was seeing something in those bones, no doubt about that. And I said to myself, you better pay attention to what this lady says to you. Mm-hmm. And for the next hour or so, she just cackled away, telling him just spewing out this information. And David tried his best to keep pace with her, with what she was saying. I tried to keep notes. I kept some notes, and I kept stuffing them into my pocket. She predicted all sorts of extraordinary things that day. One of the first things she said to me was, he will cross the big water. He will go over the big water. That's the term she used, the big water. And he will go in that direction. And she points to the north, in a northern direction, over her shoulder. In that direction, he will go over the big water. Of course, I had no idea what she meant, none whatsoever. But I made a mental note of that, and I wrote it down, and on and on. And she's told me all sorts of things. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, just to give you some idea as to what to substantiate what this woman had said about the big water. Now, remember, Zambia is a landlocked country. There's no ocean there. And this little old lady had probably been never more than 10 miles away from the village where she was born, in the bush. So in 1966, what I did, by the way, I left Zambia, and I did go back to South Africa. I worked in the film industry for a while. But then I emigrated to Canada.
Oh, that's where we started our conversation before we went on air. You said you had been to Canada. Okay.
Now, I wanted to emigrate to the United States, but because of the apartheid system, the Americans, they were not giving visas to white South Africans to come to the States because of the anti-apartheid policy of the country at that time. But the Canadians were very sweet and very, very understanding. Okay. And within 2 weeks of me applying for a visa, I got an immigration visa. They were absolutely wonderful. And I will eternally be grateful to Canada, and I have a soft spot and always will for your remarkable and wonderful country. And I did have a great time in Canada, and I've been back since many times to film. Anyway, so I emigrated from South Africa to Montreal.
Yes.
That was going to be my first point of call. Now, those days, 1966, I was 22 years old, and people didn't fly those days. If you went abroad, and particularly if you had 2 big bags of luggage with you, you went by sea. You went by ship. Yeah. So I took a ship from Cape Town and went to Southampton in England, and from there I was going to take a train to Liverpool, and from Liverpool I was going to take the Empress of Canada, a wonderful ship of the to Montreal. And halfway along the voyage from Cape Town to Southampton, I went up to the top deck one night of this ship. We just crossed the equator. We'd just gone from south to north. And I every night used to look at the stars. The stars used to change every night as we slowly headed our way north. And one of the most conspicuous star systems in the southern sky is the Southern Cross. It's as conspicuous there as the Big Dipper is here in the north.
Yes.
And every night the Southern Cross would get lower and lower and lower and lower on the horizon. And it made me aware of the fact that here I was going from north to south. I was crossing the earth from one hemisphere to the other. And it made me aware of the fact that here I was, this little guy on a ship stuck in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I was crossing the planet. I was going from one part of the world to the other. I was very aware of that. You know, when you fly, you get in a plane and you get out and you don't know where you've been. But when you go by sea, it's a slower process, and you are aware of this idea of moving geographically from one place to the other. And suddenly it hit me when I thought about that, because I thought, oh my God, that little old lady told me this.
Right.
You will cross the big water to go to the north, which is exactly what I was doing.
Yeah.
And from that moment onwards, every single thing, all of these amazing things that this woman had told me, and I haven't told you any of the other things she told me, but everything came to pass. For the next 60 years, every prediction that that woman had made just by staring at those bones and stones lying on her cold concrete floor in a hut in Central Africa, all came true. It was unbelievable. And you know, I mean, I can give you other examples of the sort of things.
I believe you. You know why? Because it's what I do myself. I don't use bones, but there are people that use runes. None of this was shocking to me about being able to speak to the dead. Yes, I can do that. I can,
of course you can. Yes.
I don't predict the future, but I will sometimes spirit, as I call it. Right. It's ancestors. Now I'm getting goosebumps. Every time I get goosebumps, it's like they're here. You can feel it. And you know, they're all on our side, whether it's your ancestors, it's whether you believe in angels, your God, whatever you believe in, but they're there all across the veil, if you will, and they want to help us succeed over here. So, you know, depending on who you connect with and you get this information.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, you can instantly tell the difference. It's always meant for your highest good. It's always meant in love. And if I do tell somebody something, if it does come through, I use something called an angel board. Quite fascinating. Yeah. So I will tell people as it is in this moment, because say they show me one timeline. But say, you know, for example, it's really mundane or it's really simple, but say they've shown me one timeline and you're going down the stairs, you know, out your building, you're turning right, you're then jump in your car and you're going to go to work. Well, the day maybe I've told you something's going to happen, that day you go down the stairs, you got up 10 minutes late, get in your car won't start. So then you got to call a cab and you go a separate way. What I'm saying is you could be going on a different timeline. Right. So this lady, though, sounds like she picked up on very specific things that were meant in your lifetime. And like you said, it all fell because there was something about a strange kidney disease you said that I was noticing in your notes.
My goodness, I don't even know where to be. Let me just say a few of the other things that she told me.
Sure, absolutely. None of this surprises me. I love it all.
No, I know you're open and thank goodness for people like you. We need more people like you. But and you know, when I talk about stuff like this to a lot of people, they sort of turn away and say, yeah, and my family, my kids, they all think I'm a bit nuts, but I don't mind. That's absolutely fine. But I know that there is more to this world than most people accept or what we are taught. The big problem is,
I say it all the time, Lionel. You know what? I long for the day where babies are raised from the moment they're born. There are no limitations. There are, you know what? We're capable of so much more than we've ever been told or ever thought to believe.
Yeah. You know, when little Mary says to Mummy, "Oh, Mummy, look, there's Granny in the corner," whereas Granny's been dead for years. Yeah. And Mummy says, "Oh, that's just your imagination. You know, you're not really seeing it. It's your imagination. Stop doing that." What Mummy should really say is, "Really, Mary, ask her how she is. Describe her to me. Tell me what she's doing." That's what that should do, because the child is seeing that.
I always say this. I say children, especially babies and young children, especially if they have an imaginary friend, find out more about that imaginary friend, because children can see there is no issue. Same as I always tell people, we have an episode on Paranormal Survivor, actually. We went through a very, very terrible time, actually, for almost 11 years, but it's what's got me on this path. But the reason I mention this is I always tell people to trust your animals. Your animals can see beyond a shadow of a doubt.
No question. Animals and children, trust them implicitly.
Yes.
When my cat stares into space, my cat isn't staring into space. My cat is seeing something that I don't see, but she is seeing it. There's no question.
Cats are so special. They're healers. And I teach people this, that, you know, if you've got, maybe you don't even know, like the global you, I mean, has something going on, whether it's emotional, could be something physical. When they lay on specific parts and they purr, that tone, they proved it heals. It's a healing type of energy that they put out.
Of course, no, because you're touching all my buttons. You know, people, we often play this game. What's your favorite sound? What's your favorite fruit? What's your favorite this? What's your favorite that? And people often play the game. What's your favorite sound? Well, my favorite sound on the planet, for me, the most incredible sound is the purring of a cat.
Yes.
It is unique in so many ways. It is so calming and soothing, and it actually is healing. When my cat purrs next to me, I don't care what I'm going through or how bad the day's been or how challenging the situation has been. It eases me immediately. It is a completely healing sound, absolutely. The purring of a cat. And that applies, by the way, to the big cats too. And I've been right next to, leopards, and I've been next to lions, and they all purr, and it's the same thing. Yes. They are content, and they are giving you a signal that they're okay with you. They're accepting you as well when they're next to you, and they're making a connection with you. And the way to manifest it is this purring sound. I think it's the most unbelievable. It's extraordinary,
I love it. And the other thing is, like, animals have chakra systems like we do.
Of course they do.
Animals or cats especially, because I have a cat and I have a dog. And don't get me wrong, they're beautiful. I love all animals. Yeah. But cats, I don't know what it is. They know what chakra needs. Like if they're on your head or they're on your chest, they're maybe here. Wherever they are, they know what the human needs. But you know what I always say too? Yeah. We don't get the animal necessarily that we want. We get the animal we need, because they're here. They are our human guides. I think they are earth angels. They are here to help us in many ways to fulfill why we are here. I always say we're not here by accident, any of us.
Oh, absolutely not. No question whatsoever. I mean, we get into that. We'll be talking for hours.
We are. I knew. You know what? I knew about you right away when I read your email, and I've been so excited to talk to you because I could pick up your energy. And then when I seen about the cats, I went, "Oh gosh, fellow animal lover. Oh, I'm gonna love them. I know I am." And I already knew, if you're open to it. We've already had an hour. It's just flown by. You're such an amazing storyteller.
I don't know how it's been an hour already, but my good, and we've got nowhere with the story yet.
I want to have you back. I hope you will come back again and again.
I'd love that. No, I absolutely would love that. But let me just give you and your listeners a couple of other examples. One of the things this woman said to me was, one day that I will go to a world that is only white. She describes this. She sees this in the bones. Now, I have no idea what she's saying. He will go, she says to David, he will go to a place that there's no color in this world. It's only white. He will go there and he will do some work in this white world, no color. I have no idea what she was talking about. She says another thing to him. She says he must be very, 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 very careful because one day he will be in a very, very wild place and he must be careful of the great beast because it might kill him. When I heard this, I thought, oh my God, what is she talking about? You know, it sounded scary. She says to him, he must be very careful. One day he will be on the big water and also the water might try to take his life. What is she talking about? I had no idea. She says to him, one day he will meet a man who was who knew a very, very close friend. He knew the most evil man who ever lived.
That fascinated me. I hope you share that story because that fascinated me. I was reading little bits.
So, you know, when she tells me all of this stuff, none of this makes sense, as you can imagine. I mean, what on earth? None of it meant anything to me. I had no reference point as to what any of this was referring to. But they all came to pass. I was working on a safari film in Mozambique in 1967. And the reason why I took the job was there were the three very wealthy Americans came out to Mozambique, which was a Portuguese territory those days, just to the east of South Africa. And it was a big hunting area. Big white hunters would go there to kill and maim and murder wild animals, you know. And none of that ever made any sense to me. I have never understood what hunting is all about. And the reason why I took the job was I wanted to find out how guys like that, these were obviously wealthy, you know, intelligent people from a Western society. Where do they get their kicks out of killing wild animals? What's that about?
I've never understood that.
So that's why I took the job. Anyway, so we're out there on the safari film, and I'm making this film about these three guys on their safari. And the day came for this one particular man, one of the hunters, to shoot an elephant. They all had permission to shoot all kinds of animals. It was carnage. It was unbelievable. Anyway, came his turn to shoot an elephant, and he shot this old bull that was selected to him by one of the leaders of the safari, a white guy. And when he shot this bull, it was part of a herd. He missed, and so the herd panicked and dispersed, running in every direction. Now, of course, the elephants know the sound of gunshot. They were used to hunters. They were used to their lives are in danger. And in the middle of the herd was a female elephant, and she had a baby next to her. Right on her neck.
Hey, we get it. You don't want to be hearing a Progressive commercial right now, so let us tell you something you do want to hear. You are powerful. You're a warrior who bathes in your enemy's tears. Then you step out of that refreshing tear bath and into a bathrobe that somehow looks good on you. Yeah, you can pull off a robe. There. Don't you feel better? You'll also feel better when you save money for driving safely with Snapshot from Progressive. Savings you can use to buy more robes. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Snapshot not available in California, North Carolina, or from all agents.
Me, but also you. The Pharaoh fast forwards his favorite foreign film, Powder Donut. Okay, what's my line?
The only line I see here on the script is get options based on your budget with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive.
Oh man, that's a tongue twister, huh? I'm sorry, I'm gonna need a few more minutes. Bulbous Walrus, the Bulbous Walrus.
The Name Your Price tool, only from Progressive.
The owl ran afoul of the comatose coxswain.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Alongside her. And she looked up and she looked straight at this hunter who had shot. And she knew that her baby was threatened and she wanted to defend her baby. And she began to charge him. And he was right in front of me because I had my camera behind him. He was in front of me, and behind me was the leader of the safari, the safari leader, the white guy. And all that this guy behind me was yelling was, "Run! Get out the way! Run! Run! Run!" So the white man who had missed the bull elephant, he ran out of my shot. So all I have in my viewfinder is this charging female elephant, heading straight now, not towards me because the hunter had run away, but now she was heading towards me at full gallop. She couldn't stop herself. She was heading straight towards me. And when she was no more than maybe 6 or 8 feet away from me, I heard bang over my shoulder. And the white hunter, the leader of the safari, shot her right between the eyes. And she crumpled onto her front legs. And she held me in her gaze, in her eyes. I know that she knew I was not responsible for harming or intending to harm her or her baby. It was the other guy. But she was dying in front of me. And then she collapsed. She rolled onto her side. She held her gaze in her, and then she her eyes glazed over and she died. And an incredible thing had happened at that very moment. Her spirit and my spirit made a connection. As she died, I felt her touch my soul. Now, the only reason why I tell you that is because time and time again, when I've had my bones read by shamans, by African shamans, in later years, decades later, they've always looked at my bones and they've always said to me, before they've said anything else, they looked at the bones and they say, what is this Ndlovu that is with you? And Ndlovu is the Zulu word for elephant. They have all seen the presence of this elephant in my bones. In other words, she has been with me all my life. The spirit of that elephant that was murdered is the only word I can use. Mm-hmm. She's been with me as a protective spirit ever since. We made that connection. And this woman, that's exactly what that woman told me, because that night back at base camp with the booze flowing and the vodka flowing and everything else, I was sitting on my own on the side and I was thinking about, my God, my life, I could have died today if that elephant had not kept charging. And then it hit me. Oh my God, that's what that little old lady had predicted. Be careful, one day in a wild place, the great beast may kill you. That's exactly what she had seen again. When she referred to this white world that that had no, let's go fast forward now to 1991. I was working on a scientific show for PBS, part of a science series called The Infinite Voyage, and I went down to Antarctica to do a film about the scientific examination of the health of Mother Earth. How do you put a barometer into the Earth's into Mama Earth's mouth? How do you find out if the Earth is doing well or not? Well, you go to a place where there are not large human populations, where there are no freeways and railroads and whatever else. Mm-hmm. You go to a pristine area. So you go to Antarctica, and there you can find the effects of human activity in a way that you can't see it when you're in an urban area, because there's too much other stuff going on. Whereas if you go to an area like that, you can see, are the seas getting more acidic? Is the ozone hole getting bigger because of all the fluorocarbons that were being pumped up in the air? Is the temperature going up? Are the glaciers melting because of climate change? Is the earth getting hotter? What's happening to the ecosystems in the ocean? What is happening to the krill populations, to the biomass in the oceans? Is there more CO2 in the air now than there was at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution? And you can do that by drilling into the ice, taking an ice core, because there are little bubbles of air that have been trapped in the ice, and it goes back hundreds of years. So the deeper you go, the further back in time you go, and you can see what was in the atmosphere 300, 400, 500 years ago compared to today. And that's what this show was all about, what these scientists were doing to examine the health of...
That's a picture I got when you said a place with no color, and I heard Antarctica, and I thought, well, yeah, but there's blue skies, there's blue water, but I got to hear this. Okay, that makes sense.
So we're doing this show, and we're down there for a period of, I don't know, I think it was like 6 weeks, talking about 1991. Christmas Day, 1991, the captain of this research ship decides to stop the ship, and no work that day. We're all going to celebrate Christmas Day on board the ship. So all the scientists and the crew and everybody got together, and because we're so far south, it was perpetual daylight, because we're so far down south in the southern hemisphere that there was a sort of a twilight time very briefly at midnight, but other than that it was perpetual daylight. And right about midnight I went on board the ship, and I to write up my notes for the day, because I keep copious notes of everything. As a documentary filmmaker, I've got used to the fact that you don't throw away a thing. You keep all your notes, and you make copious notes about everything: people, places, events, everything. So I was doing that.
When you go back to whether there's editing or whatever, there's things probably most of us would forget. And if you've kept copious notes, you're like, oh yeah, that happened. Oh yeah, that happened. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So I was up on deck, and I was trying to describe to myself the world I was in, because I wanted to give myself some reference points later on when we were writing the narration for the show. And I looked around me, and the hull of this big ship was red. We were on a big red, because red you can see easily in the ice for rescue purposes should you ever run into trouble. And the sea was covered in pack ice, so there was no water. It was ice, completely white. And from horizon to horizon was this ice, white on the surface of the ocean. No water to be seen at all. And the ship we're on is an icebreaker. So as she moves forward, she rides above the ice and then cracks it and then moves forward. That's what the icebreakers do. So we were static in this world. And then I said, wow, you can't even see where the sea ends and where the horizon ends and where the sky begins, because everything was white. It was like this glaring white. And so I'm writing this down. And as I write this down, I thought, oh my God, this is the white world that lady had foreseen in a hut in Africa decades earlier. It has come to pass. She saw this, Time and time again, this kept happening in my life. And for the next 6
ask you, because we're going to run out of time. I can listen to you. We are going to talk after this anyway, so I'm going to have you back if you'll come back. But also, did she talk about, though, because in your book you mentioned about how did you get into the near-death experiences, and you got photos that said of UFOs. Did she talk about any of that stuff at all?
I'm going to tell you something else before we go there.
Okay.
And that is when she said to me about the man who knew the most evil man who ever lived.
Yes, you have to tell that. That's fascinating.
One of the things that I did, and I'm going back to the year 1983, I was doing a series of films on the history of South African Airways, which is a very old airline and a very fine airline it was in its time. It's now, like so many other airlines, it's grounded at the moment. But anyway, it was celebrating its 50th anniversary in 1984. And it was originally formed in 1929. The guy ran out of money, so the government took it over, bailed it out, and it was renamed South African Airways. So I wanted to tell the story of the history of that airline. Now, an airline based in Africa is a difficult thing to do, particularly in the early 30s. There are no alternative airfields to land at. Things were pretty primitive back in those days. No weather forecasting services, all that kind of stuff. So it was pioneering days. I mean, we're talking about real pioneering times. It was a great story. And so while we were doing our research, we found out that when the airline became nationalized in 1934, they ordered 3 brand new aircraft from a factory in Germany, from a company was called the Junkers Company. They made very fine airliners, all metal, only sat 14 people, but this was the latest and the greatest airliners at the time. But how do you get them all the way from Germany, all the way down this continent of Africa to South Africa, to Johannesburg? It was a big expedition, a big deal to do that. 2-week operation to just do that. And it turned out that one of the men who flew one of these delivery flights was still alive. He was a German pilot, and he was retired. He was in his late 80s. He must have been, if I remember correctly, about 88 or 89, and that he was still alive. And I said to my researchers, and I said, we've got to interview this guy about that flight. I mean, talk about high adventure. I mean, God, It turned out that he was retired in a little village in Bavaria. And through the German government, it was facilitated that we would have access to him and that we could interview him. Not only that, but this man had actually shot a home movie. He was also an amateur cinematographer, and he'd made a film about that flight. And not only was he alive, but a copy of his film was in a lab in Frankfurt. So when we were producing,
you hit the jackpot about this story. How better could you get the history?
I mean,
from?
like totally, absolutely. So we get to Frankfurt, and we go to the lab. We find this film, and we have I select sections of it to be copied for the film that we were making. And now it's time to go and interview the pilot. So a guy from the Foreign Office, from the German Foreign Office, who facilitated this whole deal and access to this man, he joined us. He joined our crew. And so we drove from Frankfurt to Bavaria, to Munich on the Autobahn. And the night before the interview, we were staying at a small hotel. outside a small town called Amashi, which is where this man had retired. And the man from the Foreign Office who spoke a perfect English, and he was going to be my translator because the pilot, whose name was Hans Bauer, B-A-U-R, he spoke no English, so he was going to be my translator for the interview. And we're sitting there at about midnight. We'd had a lot of good wine to drink. We had a very good time that night. And, around about midnight, he sort of peered over his glass at me and he said, how much do you really know about the history of Capitan Bauer, his background? And I said, well, I don't know. What is there to know? All I'm interested in is about that delivery flight. And he said, yeah, but do you know anything other than that about him? And I said, well, what is there to know, And he called for some more wine. He poured the wine.
I needed more wine when you tell this story.
and he leans close over to me like this with a glass and he says, do you realize that he was Adolf Hitler's personal pilot? And of course, well, you could have, I sobered up immediately. You can imagine how I felt.
Yes.
This is an opportunity of a lifetime. You don't often get an opportunity. It was like, I'm going to interview Genghis Khan. I mean, that was, how I felt.
That close.
And so the next day, we pitch up at this little man's picture book house, beautiful little doll's house place with little flower beds in front. His wife answered the door. His third wife. He'd been married 3 times, and we were welcomed inside. And I said to the crew, set up over here, microphones, lights, all the rest of it. We'll do the interview here in his living room. He was nowhere to be seen, and we were sort of fumbling about getting everything set up, and then we clunk, clunk, clunk down the stairs. Comes this guy. He was a short little man, grey hair, old, very old, with a cane, hobbling. He had a gummy leg. Apparently, it was a war injury that he had suffered, which I was also told, by the way, by this man from the Foreign Office who said he had a war industry. And he asked me specifically, don't discuss the Second World War. That night when he told me he was Adolf Hitler's personal pilot, I said, no, that's not what I'm here to do. I want to know about the delivery flight. I'm not going to ask anything about the war. So he was sort of relieved to hear about that because he said, because he's got a war injury. End of story. We arrive at the house. This man comes down the stairs. He meets the man from the Foreign Office, this government official. He met some of the other people. And then he was introduced to me. The minute I shook his hand, for me, we've often heard the phrase 6 degrees of separation. Well, this is 1 degree of separation because the minute I shook his hand, I felt as though I was one handshake away from Adolf Hitler. How often had Adolf Hitler shaken that very hand that I was shaking now? Did I feel any animosity towards the guy or anger or anything? No, I did not. I saw him purely as a pilot with a history that I wanted to put into my documentary film. I felt no antagonism towards him whatsoever. None. I couldn't. I mean, how could I?
Well, how could you, though? Because, so many people, like he was the pilot. He was probably in on a lot of stuff he knew about, but how much control did he even have about it, right?
Let me go on and tell you what happened. We do the interview, and at the end of the interview, which is good, he gave us a very good interview, all in German, of course, and I said at the end of it, I speak enough little German to get by, and I said, danke schön, thank you very much. Das ist fertig, we're now finished. And he says, and he seemed very relieved. And the man from the Foreign Office sort of was relieved because I hadn't brought up the Second World War. And then this guy, Hans Bauer, clapped his hands and called his wife and asked her to bring some drinks and some snacks for the crew and for everybody, which she did. And
nothing like ordering your wife around. Bring the food, bring the drink.
So she does this. She brings the schnapps and the Kirschwasser and all that stuff. And the crew tuck in, and he and I, Hans Bauer, he comes sauntering over to me with the cane and, speaking German. And he says, kommen Sie mit mir, come with me. And he takes me around the corner of the living room, where the living room was sort of attached to a little side room where there was a bathroom and a toilet. And on the wall was a photograph. And in this photograph was him and Adolf Hitler in their uniforms, standing in front of one of these aircraft that we'd been discussing. And he points to the aircraft. He says, this is what, one of the aircraft that we've been discussing. Yeah. I said, thank you very much. I didn't ask anything about the other man in the photograph, but he points at Hitler and he says to me in German, he said, do you want to know about him? And I said, yeah. The man from the Foreign Office heard this and sort of covered his face in absolute horror. He didn't want to go there. He specifically asked me not to go there. But this man offered to tell
You
me.
didn't go there. And you know what? I keep feeling like this man respected you so much because you were a man of your word. Like, he didn't know that you'd made that promise to your translator, but you did not go there. You respected the boundary. You came for what you were there for. I can't wait to hear the rest.
So he calls me and he says, sit down here with me on the couch, which I do. I sit next to him. I'm sitting next to Adolf Hitler's personal pilot on a couch drinking, good German booze, Kirschwasser or whatever it was. And he says to his wife again, because he couldn't move around very easily, he says to her, Senta, he called her Senta, that was his nickname for her, bring the photograph albums. And she brings these a big pile of photograph albums, 6 or 7 leather-bound photograph albums, and puts them on a table in front of us. And one by one, he goes through the albums and he shows me his entire life with Adolf Hitler during the Second World War. And in these images are everybody, all the interior of the members of the Third Reich, that, the inner fraternity that ran the Third Reich, Goebbels and everybody, you name them, they're all in these images.
Wow.
And there's dinner parties with Adolf Hitler and Mussolini from Hitler, and always in the background is Hans Bauer. And he says to me, Hitler and I were very great friends. In fact, he says to me in German, and this man from the Foreign Office had now joined us and is translating all of this for me. But I had the sound recorders record the sound as well. I said, David, bring the...
I hope that you did, my God, to have that opportunity.
Bring me the mic. And he says to me, when he married his first wife, Hitler gave him his wedding party in Hitler's personal apartment in Munich. Huh? That's how close these two guys were. So this was a revelation to see the inner workings of the Third Reich from his perspective, and how close he and Adolf Hitler were. Well, it was an extraordinary afternoon. And by the time we left, we were driving away at the end of the day. We'd wrapped up all the gear, taken all the cables and the lights and everything, put it all away. And probably 6 o'clock that evening, we were driving away from his place. And I looked back out of the rear of the car, the van that we were in, and he was standing outside of his house waving goodbye to us with his wife next to him. And, eventually they disappeared from view. And it was only at that moment, because up until that point, I was totally overwhelmed by what was going on. It had never struck me. But at that moment, when he disappeared from view, I suddenly realized, oh my God, this is the man that woman told me about. You will meet a man who was very, very close to the most evil man who ever lived. She saw that. One of the biggest tyrants and mass murderers of all time. And this was one of his closest friends. And we just spent the afternoon together.
You know what's fascinating about that, though, Lionel, is we always hear, and it breaks my heart to hear people that think that the Holocaust didn't occur. It did occur. But the thing is, you got to hear from the other perspective. And there's very few people that have ever really heard that, right? We never got to hear the other side. No matter how twisted or how, saying that or what it is, you got to hear the other side.
Well, we didn't talk Holocaust. We didn't talk about the war. We basically talked about his relationship with Hitler and how kind Hitler always was to him.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
That's
and,
what
and,
I'm talking about.
and his family. Being. Yeah. Yes. The human side of one of the most violent times in human history. That's, it was unbelievable. And it took a long time to process that all and make sense of it. But what is important in terms of why we're talking about it now is that it was foreseen by a little old lady in Africa who probably had never even heard of the Second World War, So, she was obviously tapping into a field, a realm that most people have no clue about, but it does exist. And she was doing that. And I came across many, many opportunities where that happened, and I've worked with a lot of people in my time. I've worked with all kinds of institutions and organizations, from NASA to Princeton University, to the Monroe Institute in Virginia, on and on and on and on. And I'm not saying that to sound boastful or arrogant in any way, but I've worked with some really good scientists and scientific brains and minds. And, I've done ethnic films and I've done social issues and whatever else. But some of the wisest people that I have ever met and the most insightful people that I've ever met, live in little mud huts in the middle of nowhere in Africa. That's what teaches you a great deal about the human spirit and what really we are capable of being and doing, us humans. We are able to access a realm that most people here in the West, we can't do that. We've lost that capability. But these guys do that.
I have to agree with you, because when I went, I always say I've been blessed unbelievably so many times, hundreds of times, to see the beginning of life, working as a neonatal intensive care unit nurse and labor and delivery and maternal newborn. And then, it got to be, 12-hour shifts were 18-hour shifts, and it was really stressful. So I decided to take a job out in the community. And then I found out even the whole circumstances about how this job came about were crazy. Not enough time to tell the story, but there are no coincidences.
No.
And then I found out where I was going to be working in the most dangerous, poorest part of my city. I only went into my office every 2 weeks, no cell phones. So nobody would know where I would be. And I would be going into these places on my own, nothing to protect myself. I almost quit. I will tell you, Lionel, that was one of the most incredible experiences in my life. I also worked in palliative care. I would also say I've been so unbelievably blessed, including going into those areas in the middle of night in palliative care and helping family members or somebody all on their own, no family, maybe an old alcoholic or drug addict, or like there was murder, there was anything you could think of in this area. That was one of the biggest lessons for me in life about humanity, people that had nothing, and the kindness that they could, just the gifts, like so many gifts, and people just don't see that. Like you said, we lose, even like you said, the gifts that this lady had that she shared with you, and you've met so many since.
Yes.
And we lose that art.
Well, because I think the word is maybe not that we've taught these things, but we unlearn these things. When a child sees things, as we were talking earlier, I think before we began the broadcast, when little Mary says to her mom, I'm seeing Granny in the corner, but Granny's been dead for years. She's seeing something.
She is, yes.
And what the mother should not say is, oh, that's your imagination. What the mother should say is, well, describe her to me. Ask her if she's okay. What does she look like? Is she happy today? Is she happy to be?
I will give you an example. Okay, this is how my grandmother had these gifts on my father's side. She knew the instant. My dad was one of 17 children. I always say good Roman Catholic family, right? French Canadian. Anyways, when her third son died in a tragic car accident, she stood up at the dinner table screaming, his name is Philip. Philip is dead. Philip is dead.
Yes.
And my dad was a child. He remembers this. And my grandfather, she was from Belgium, and he was from, he was a Canadian, French Canadian. And I remember him saying, or as my dad says, told her to sit down. Don't be ridiculous. He's just late for dinner. An hour and a half later, the police showed up. I guess what had happened was, this was back in the 50s. My uncle was riding in a car. They used to fix up cars and all kinds of stuff. No seatbelts. He was in front of his friend, and they were hot rodding down a road. I don't know where it was, somewhere around here. And he fell out of the door opened, and he fell out, and his friend ran him over right at 6:03.
Oh,
But
my
the
Lord.
reason I bring this up is I never push this on my children, excuse me, but when my oldest was probably about 3 years old, he's almost 26. But anyways, I had hurt my back as a nurse. I've not been able to go back to work. And it used to be just laying in bed for years. Anyways, he came up to me, and of course, you always try and hide things from your children, right? And he came up, he said, Mommy, he goes, your back is really sore today. And I said, well, honey, I said, what makes you think that? I said, yes, actually it is, but that's okay. And he said, well, lots of times you have all these pretty lights around your head. And he said, today they're just gray around your head. This is a 3-year-old at the time telling me this. So children can see.
Oh, yes. Oh, no question. Oh, absolutely they can, of course. So we have the rather unfortunate habit of telling them that it's not happening, and we take it away from them. And it's not in the educational system. If you can't pick it up and prove it and put it in a petri dish under a microscope and see it, it doesn't exist. And that's the problem. we're just not open enough to these things. And when I did a show called Beyond Death for one of the cable channels here. I forget which one it was. It might have been the History Channel or A&E or one of those. And it was a 2-hour special. And the brief was, what happens to human consciousness after the demise of the physical body? In other words, what happens to your consciousness when you're dead? Mm-hmm. Does it continue to exist? And if so, where does it go? Mm-hmm. What is consciousness? Now, ever since I made this show, this was in the mid-90s, I have been fascinated by the nature of consciousness. And I worked with a man called Robert John at Princeton University, and he was doing very, very serious research into consciousness. What is consciousness? Does it only exist in tissue, in a brain where neurons, the synapses are firing? Or is it something else? Is it outside of that? And he did experiments whereby consciousness lives outside of the body. And he proved this because he said, you must, not sitting in the same room as me, in fact, sometimes not even in the same city, as part of an experiment, influence a number generator. And you make the number generator come up with more numbers, let's say the number 9, more than any other number. People were able to do that. People were able to manipulate the height of a fountain in a little fountain in his office.
Or water.
Water is particularly interesting because water has its own consciousness. Look at that man Emoti in Japan.
Yes, that's who I'm talking about. Yes.
If you are in a good mood or you're in a positive situation, the water knows that. Why do you think that baptism has been going on for so many years? And why water features so prominently in ancient rituals? Because those folks knew, the elders, those ancient ones, they knew that water itself.
Progressive presents an interview with your upstairs neighbor.
My name's Barry. I live right above you. I don't host parties. I host after parties. They're like parties, only louder and nobody goes home. You can see right here I ripped out all the carpeting because it was holding me back with my pogo stick. Man's got a pogo. Oh, I'm a prankster. I'll grease up a soda can and then when somebody grabs it, boom!
Progressive can't save you from your upstairs neighbor, but we can save you money when you bundle renters and auto insurance with us. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company, affiliates, and other insurers. Bundle discount not available in all states or situations.
Good afternoon. Would you like to try a free sample of our double fudge brownie?
Oh, sure. That's very good. I'll just take one more, just to be sure. Yep, still very good.
Some things never change. Like never being able to take just one free sample. And Geico saving folks lots of money on their car insurance.
Is that macadamia nut I taste? Let me take one more.
Sir?
Yeah, I thought so.
15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
Is in itself a power. Yes. Children are baptized with water. Why? Why water? Because every molecule in that water is in itself able to connect with your consciousness.
Absolutely. Or remote viewing. Look at remote viewing.
Exactly.
We go on and on. I do want to give a huge shout out in the chat because there's something for you in here I have to mention. But I have a friend that I told about you. He's going to be coming on. He's been on the show before, Dark Hour Paranormal. So I want to give him a shout out. Hi, Michael. I was telling him all about you before. He goes, oh, I got to watch. So he's watching. And then Zach Man, he sent a super chat. Thank you, Zach. That was really sweet of you. He said, love tonight's so far. He goes,
Hey, Michael, I got your phone call today. I'm going to call you tomorrow.
Good. I was going to talk to you about that afterwards. Joe's listening. Joe, we just got a super chat from Zach Man. And what he said was, love tonight's show so far. He goes, you got to invite Lionel back, Lorilei. He's loving you. So.
Oh, I'm so pleased. Thank you so much. I'd love to be back to talk to you.
Thanks,
I think it's so important that we explore these things. It really is. It's so important today, particularly with all this negative energy floating around us, around the world, not only with the pandemic, but, politically and so on. The world is a mess and people lose faith and people are pretty despondent generally. And I think people actually need to know that there's more than just this, there's more than just the political headline of the day and the COVID.
Stay away from the headlines of the day. And in fact, I have a son with severe autism. He was the one that was popping his head in here. And he's very much, with no disrespect, at that very precocious age of like a 5 to 7-year-old. He's actually 22. He's going to be 23. Right. But what I say to him in particular, because he can read, He can write, he sees stuff on YouTube and he worries. And what I say to him is, honey, and I say this all the time as a spiritual teacher and mentor too, let's focus on what we want to see, not what we don't want. And you know what? One person can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Yes. No question.
Absolutely. Now, near-death experiences, we're right. This is like flying by, and you were the most fantastic storyteller, and it's all true stuff. But I'm just like, you were the first person that has ever made me cry during my show. Like I was like sobbing listening to that. So I'm going to start again about the elephant.
I didn't mean to do that, but you know, I totally empathize. I know exactly how you were feeling. It's a brutal fact of life, and of course, you know. I cry every day when I think about what happens to the animals in this world, but we won't go there. I mean,
we'll have to do another show on that. But I got to ask you, because like I said, I have studied near-death experiences for 40 years. I can remember it was August 1984, my first nursing journal, a year before I went into university for nursing. On the front, it was two things that have always stuck with me. Why are we always eating our young? And it's a nursing journal, whatever year it is. So it would be like nursing 2021 now.
Yeah.
And the other one was nurses' experiences with near-death experiences.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Now, the first part was basically senior nurses not wanting to take the time to mentor younger nurses, burnt out, what have you. I've always taken students and remembered that, because anybody new coming into profession, especially our young, are our future. Yeah. Now, near-death experiences, when I read nurses' experiences, I was fascinated. I have had patients have a cardiac arrest, and I've been so blessed to be able to speak with them after. I don't ask them. They want to share that story. They feel comfortable. Yes. And I'd love to hear, how did you get into that, especially with children? That just blows my mind, reading children's stories.
Yeah, it was. I think the year was probably 97 or 98. Again, for one of the cable companies, and I had a show to write and direct called Beyond Death. The brief was what happens to consciousness, at the demise of the physical body, as I think I mentioned earlier. So that's what the show was about. And some of the stories in the show, not all of them, we covered many territories about what consciousness is really all about, or soul, or spirit, or whatever you want to call it, whatever label you wish to put on that. But a big chunk of this 2-hour special was devoted to those people who had near-death experiences, NDEs, as they refer to it now. And I met a number of people. There was a woman in Atlanta who had an aneurysm on the brain, and the only way that they could operate was to actually stop her heart, stop the blood flow. Otherwise, she would have bled to death. Open her skull, stop the blood flow, remove the aneurysm, suture it all up, put the skull back again, and then resuscitate her. So she was clinically dead for, I don't know how long it was, but it was quite a long time, because the as you know as a nurse, the brain needs oxygen, otherwise it's going to shut down. So you can only deprive the brain of oxygen for so long, and other than that, it's tickets. But anyway, she was clinically dead for as long as they could keep her in that condition, while they stopped her blood and stopped the heart. And during that period, she actually left her body. So she tells me this entire story. She said, I went to sleep. In other words, they anesthetized me, and I was asleep. And then I woke up, and I found myself drifting and looking down at my body, they were cutting into my head, and they were doing the surgery. And I was watching this, and I was floating above in the operating room, looking down at the surgeon, what he was doing to me. And she watched the whole thing she's described to me. And the surgery took a long time. I was like a 4 or 5 hour procedure. And I interviewed her, I interviewed the surgeon, I interviewed a lot of people to do with this particular procedure. And when she was resuscitated, they brought her back to life again. They started her heart going in with the paddles, and then the blood was flowing, and then, obviously she eventually was revived. And she said to the surgeon, she said, I saw everything. And he said, what do you mean you saw everything? And she said, I saw what you did. I saw what you did to my head. I saw how you did what you did to my brain. I saw all of that. Yeah. And he said, yeah, sure, you saw it.
Sure,
yeah. And he said, all right, so what did you see? And she describes, she said, well, I was floating above where the big light was, and I looked past and I could see what you were doing. And he said, well, prove to me that you saw that. How am I supposed to believe this? And she gave him an example. She said, well, at one point you asked the nurse to pass you an instrument and she dropped it and you scolded her.
Mm-hmm.
And then she passed you another one. Why did you scold her? She didn't do it on fault. It wasn't her fault. She just dropped it by mistake. And he said to her, you saw that?
Mm-hmm.
You were dead at that time. And she said, yeah, I saw that. Not only that, because the procedure was he had a little tape deck playing in the corner of the operating room of his favorite music. You know what she said to him? I heard all your music. She said, this group I liked, that group I didn't, this one I did. He said, you heard that? She said, yeah. And, I asked him at great length, and he said, there is no question in my mind that woman was conscious and she was watching this procedure. I talked to a guy who was crushed by a boulder when he was rock climbing. When he arrived at the hospital in the ambulance, he was clinically dead. He was revived. He saw all of this. He was witness to all of that. But, speaking to adults is one thing. But when you talk to children, that's another whole ball game altogether. Because kids don't make up the stuff. And here's what's so extraordinary. I met this pediatrician in Seattle who had collected a file on children who had NDEs. Some of them were his own patients, but some of them were others. And people knew about him, that he was collecting these files. And he eventually met all of these children. And he asked all of them to make a drawing of what they saw while they were asleep. In other words, when they were clinically dead. Mm-hmm. I talked to 2 or 3 of those kids, and he showed me files on at least a dozen of them. Mm-hmm. And he showed me the pictures that they drew. Just about all of them drew very, very similar images of a tunnel and this long tunnel-like object that these kids drew. And at the end of it was this big, wide open white space. Some of them drew what they thought were doctors. Some of them drew what they thought were angels, but all of them were white figures. These children said these white people, these white doctors or these white angels. One child said there was more than one Jesus. There were lots of Jesuses there, but they were all in white.
I was waiting to hear that because children usually talk about Jesus. They usually say,
yes. Mm-hmm. And, all of these kids said that they were given the option to go back through the tunnel. In other words, go back to mommy and daddy, go back to your world, go back to your family, or you can stay with us. You have the choice. All these kids were given the choice. And kids said, well, I was given the option of pressing a green button or a red button or pulling a lever, a right one or a left one, or opening a door in that room, a left door or a right door. The one would take me back to where mommy and daddy is, and the other one would take me to heaven. They were given those options. And their stories were all similar. None of these kids knew each other. And they were all telling you the same thing and drawing similar images. They don't make that stuff up. Near-death experiences are absolutely without any question. You believe, and I know you do. But a lot of people
what about Dr. Eben Alexander? And then I have a question for you to see if you've encountered this, because I have a theory about why this happens. But have you heard the story of Dr. Eben Alexander?
Just remind me.
He was a neurologist who was an atheist, all about business, just worked nonstop, brain surgery. He contracted meningitis, of course, just about on cue, monkey. This is my German Shepherd, Emmy.
Hi, Emmy.
Anyways, he died. He clinically died while he was in a coma in the hospital.
You're right.
He had a near-death experience. He no longer works as a surgeon. He goes all around the world speaking about what he experienced. He's written books. Of course, there's people that are skeptics and think it's all a bunch of whatever.
Yeah, hogwash or whatever, yeah.
But have you heard of stories, because this fascinated me, and they're not common, but I have a theory why it happens, where people have a hell experience. Have you heard that before?
I have heard stories of that, not with people who've had NDEs, no. But I've heard many, many tales of people, psychics essentially, and people who are able to communicate with those who've passed on to the other side. Okay. And many, many of those people who have passed on to the other side have told about this experience where you go through a very, very traumatic. There's a time in the period of transition. There's a moment where you actually do go through a very, very traumatizing time. Some people have described it as as not as hell, but they've used something else. It's like a storm gate or something like that. And I think it mainly pertains to people who die suddenly, who aren't prepared for death, like during an accident or murder or something like that.
Those people I find, they don't. A lot of people don't even realize they've passed because
and they don't realize they've crossed over. Yes, exactly.
No, this is an actual NDE. And there's one in particular on YouTube. I'll send you the story if you want. It actually had me in tears watching it. And I'm not a big crier. Like, I don't cry really easy. That's why I was bawling about the elephant. I was like, oh my God, I never cry like this. But what it was this soldier that I guess they were all in the barracks. There was 4 of them, and the rest had gone home. They didn't have any money left, so they were hanging about, and somebody had a camera, and they were exploring a bunch of empty buildings and stuff, and there was a noose hanging down. And they suggested, wouldn't that be cool with this last picture if we made it look like somebody was hanging? And he, of course, was the junior officer, so they got him to do it. But as he was breathing in, he didn't know, he hadn't seen them talking. They pulled the noose, okay? So anyways, as the story goes, he said he's seen them running in opposite directions, and they all went over they were sitting there. One guy had a bunch of chocolate bars or candy bars, people in the US would call it, and one guy kept asking him, can I have one yet? Can I have one yet? Can I have one yet? And he's watching all this, explaining all this.
Right.
He's and he's listening. He's not saying anything. So he figures he's just sitting there, with the guys, like hanging out. All of a sudden, one of the guys says, guys, I don't think he's joking. And they all look over at his body. He's slumped over. He's completely blue. And he goes, all of a sudden I realized I had passed. So as he took a step, he said, he explains his whole experience. And it's quite terrifying.
Yeah.
But I guess with the guys realizing what had happened, they resuscitated him. And I've talked to other people about this because this was quite terrifying. He described it as being in hell. I think what happens is there's many astral planes. And I don't think probably his heart was completely stopped. And I've heard this from other people too. Maybe it's, maybe 5 beats still, 10 beats. So you kind of get stuck in those lower astral planes. And I've heard this explained to others. That's why I asked you, because this has always fascinated me. You don't hear about it very often.
No, you don't actually. No. It makes sense to me. I think that is a distinct possibility. Of course, there are many realms and planes and levels. Of course, there are.
Yes.
And I think depending on the degree of trauma of your death, of the dying experience, people can maybe experience that.
Because he didn't even know he was clinically supposedly dead either until they said, oh, guys, I don't think he's joking. And then he looked over at his body and he said he was utterly shocked because he just thought it was a prank and he was sitting with the guy. So again, very quick passing. He didn't even realize. So
I think, I think that, and I think it's important for people to hear this, but I think that people should also hear something else, and that is this, that if you do have a loved one who has died under traumatic conditions or circumstances, either, on the operating table or an accident or a victim of murder, the most helpful thing that one can do is to try to communicate and wish them an easy transition. Because it's merely a transition. It's from one level to the other. We don't die. The body, yes, the body. We say goodbye to that, but we continue, and we continue many times, probably millions of times. But to help the consciousness or the soul or the spirit, whatever you want to call it, make that transition. Just wish them a peaceful one, and an easy one, and one that they can cope, because sometimes they may find it a traumatic experience. Just help them along, and then they will be fine. Because once they have made the transition and gone through that awful period, be it flames or whatever, they're going to be absolutely fine. But just help them through that difficult period.
Yes, I don't know why. I always say I don't want to work with dark things, but the more I say as a light worker, this happens. And I had somebody contact me that she said she came out of her washroom and there was a girl in spirit, completely soaked, looked about 9 months pregnant, angry as hell, saying he murdered me, he killed me. And she didn't know what to do. She was terrified.
Yes.
And I said, I'm willing, like this girl knew a little bit about spirituality. And I said, I'm willing to help her cross over, because we can. It's very easy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can.
Love, create light. Like, people don't realize how important the imagination is. That, I think that's another reason why children can see so well, because
but you
everything's
know what? You know what, Laura? It's actually more than that, I think, and it's actually it's more, and yet it's even simpler than that. And let me just quote from the last page of my book, "Forever in My Veins." The very end of the book, I basically compare what we're going through as a kind of dodgem ride, a bumper car ride at a fairground. I don't know what you call it in Canada. In England, they call it dodgems. In the States, we call it bumper cars. But at the fairground,
bumper cars.
You know those bumper cars things, right? Everybody knows about those. And at the back of the bumper car is a pole. And the pole is connected to either what looks like chicken wire above the ride.
Yeah.
That's where you get the DC electricity that runs the car, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you get the power for the car. I think all of us, and I'm going to quote myself, whether you're a person or a pony or a petunia, we are all connected to something like that field above the ride.
That. That makes it so easy to see. We're all connected. We're all connected to
We're
that power
all
grid, right?
connected to this grid. There is this field. May the force be with you.
Yes.
It's true. It exists. There is this field. There is this grid, and it exists on a cosmic level. Of that, I have no doubt whatsoever.
I agree with you 100%. 100%.
And that's how we're able to do that. And if you want to contact a loved one, or you want to contact someone in the past or the future or whatever it may be, just remember, we're all connected to that grid. There's no question. We are. And how do you learn to do that? That's, people say, well, how do I do that? I always say to them, well, spend time on your own. Just turn off everything electrical.
Meditation.
Pull the plug out of all those electronic devices and go and sit in a corner, close the drapes, sit in a dark room and meditate. Just go inside yourself.
Yeah.
Meditation will take you to levels that you can't even begin to believe exists.
Absolutely.
And you will reach realms that you can't even imagine, and they are as real as the chair you're sitting in.
Ancestors, whatever you want to call it, spirit, as I call collectively, they will hold classes with you. You want to learn about something, they keep appointments. So you say, if I'm going to show up at whatever time every Wednesday, and I'd love to learn more about this, you can. You know what it is? It's as an adult, it's us not trusting, because we're communicating all the time. We really are. That inner voice that we hear, that's our own, that always has the right advice at the last moment when you've got this terrible dilemma. You're laying in bed at night. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And they call it a stroke of genius. It's always meant for your highest good. It's always meant in love, and it always works out. Guess where that comes from?
And then they come up with other fancy names for it, like synchronicity and all that. Fine, you call it that if you wish, but it's about your connection to that grid. We're all connected to that field, all of us.
I agree. Wait, Michael wrote something here. I want to read. I should don't have my glasses on. Zachman says he loved the analogies that we're talking about. Michael from Dark Hour Paranormal says, absolutely, I'm glued to this. And then he says, which also makes me wonder if we're actually speaking to that consciousness and not necessarily pulling out a recollection, from that grid. So I think what he's talking about, being connected and getting information, he's saying, getting it from the grid, or where's it coming from?
If I can answer Michael in this way, I think, and I'm no expert, but there are terms for all our past lives. Some people refer to it as the Akashic record or whatever you want, right? But
there is the Akashic records.
there is no such thing as time. Time does not exist. It's all contemporaneous. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow, the future, the past, the present, it's all one. And that grid gives you access to all of that. So if that's what he's asking, yes, of course you can access that. Absolutely. One of the reasons why we aren't always able to access it directly in a particular lifetime is because you don't want to short circuit the system. You have to learn lessons. One of the reasons why we're here is we're here for a learning purpose. And not only for this incredible cosmic journey, which is like the biggest fun ride imaginable, but we're here to learn. And you're not always being given access to those pieces of information from past lives, because you'll be short-circuiting the system. It's like cheating on the exam. You've got to learn the lesson. That's what's important.
But we have the choice not to, too, right? We have that free will. We do.
We do.
I
We
always like to
absolutely-
liken it to, it seems that the further we get away from whatever we may have set out for ourselves entering into this lifetime, the more difficult life becomes. It's almost like it's pushing you towards that towards that path. I could be wrong,
Yeah.
but that's kind of how
Well,
I feel.
listen, it's the old thing about people say, why is there so much evil and darkness in the world? And I say, well, guess why it exists? It does exist. Of course it exists. And the purpose of evil and darkness and all those ghastly things is to push you towards the light.
Yes.
It has a purpose.
Mhm. I
Yin-
just said this that last week
Yeah.
or the week before
Yeah.
on this show, that when we're in status quo, things are perfect, they're beautiful. We're just in,
Yeah.
and we've all had those moments. There's
Yeah.
no impetus for change. There's no impetus to learn. There's no impetus for anything to grow. Unfortunately, it's the difficult times or the evil that give us the choice. Like, let's grow, let's change something, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I suggest that anybody who ponders on this, that wonderful symbol with the yin and yang, the black
Yes.
and the white,
Yes.
anybody who wants to think about this, just get one of those, put it on the wall, stare at that. It's a very, very profound symbol. It tells you all about it. It's the dark and the light have equal functions in your life. They're there for a reason. Both of them, positive and negative, they both have to exist in order to push you forward. And that's why it exists. Yin and yang, whoever came up with that knew a thing or two,
They sure did. We are almost out of time, Lionel. Please promise me you'll come back, because we didn't even get to the UFOs or the symbology.
we never got to the UFOs. No, we never got to the extraterrestrials. We never got to any of that stuff. There's
Well,
a lot to talk about. And, I'd love to be on your show again because there is so much stuff to explore. By the way, I photographed a UFO in Canada, would you believe, in Saskatchewan. I filmed a UFO in
Well, now
1960.
you got to come back and tell us all about it. And if you have the picture, if you're comfortable sharing it, Joe will put it up for us.
No, I don't. It was shot on film, and we sent it away. And that's a story in itself. But yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I think this is probably the year of. This may be the year of disclosure, where I think we may be told a thing or two about what's been going on. These things have been around for millennia, for thousands and thousands of years, if not
And
millions.
Joe runs International Center for Alien Research. That's one of his shows he does, is about UFOs and stuff. We have Mr. West, and we're just ending this show, you guys. I'm so sorry, but we're going to have Lionel back. I think you and I are going to be friends, Lionel, because I could talk to you for hours and listen to you. My gosh.
Likewise.
If you're okay with that.
Yeah, and if people want to communicate with me, they're more than welcome to do so. Just go to my website. I've got it. There's an email there. They can communicate with me.
Okay.
I'd be very happy to do that. And I think, if people read the book, I think it will just
remind people the name, where they can get it, the whole bit.
The name of the book is Forever in My Veins. And what does that mean? It's about the spirit, the essence of Africa that still is very much, it defines who I am. I grew up there and I learned some of my most profound lessons there. And even though I'm a white guy living in LA, working in Hollywood, it's the pulse of Africa that's still within me. And I think everybody can learn something from that. So Forever in My Veins is the title of the book. The subtitle is How Film Led Me to the Mysterious World of the African Shaman, because I am a filmmaker. I've been making movies for 60 years. And I'd love them to read it because I think they'll get something out of it. There's a note of hope at the end. It's all about moving forward. It's all about your cosmic journey. It's for real. It's not an airy-fairy, ooga booga idea. It's for real. And I've experienced it myself. I've been very lucky, and I wanted to share that with everybody.
I love it.
So this is the week the book releases. It's available now on Amazon.com, and I suggest people will get some.
We were meant to have you on because actually that email that Gavin sent me, I think, was in November, and I think it went to my spam. And when I found it, so it was perfect timing. Your book's coming out this week. So your website is LionelFriedberg.com.
Correct. Yes, Lionel Friedberg.
Okay.
Lionel Friedberg, one word, and LionelFriedberg.com.
You have been such a delight. People in the chat are loving you. Like I said, I can't wait to have you back on here. And you've been such a delight, an absolute delight.
Well,
so
thank you. Thank you. No, I thank you. It's been great. And it's really been an honor being on your show. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for listening. And, it's all about the journey, guys, and it's amazing.
Well, we're going to get you to come back and finish telling us some more, if you will. Like we said, there were things we didn't touch on, and like I say, I'll be in touch with you after the show. But I want to remind people before we let you go quickly, if you want to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me on Facebook.com/The Angel Rock, as well as I have 2 groups on Facebook: Paranormal University for all things paranormal, and the Angel Rocker Tribe for all things like many of the things we talked about tonight. Tomorrow night, I will be back with my partner in crime, as I call her, and my bestie, Seraphine Hurley, or as Joe calls us, Sarah Lee, with Tripping the Void tomorrow night, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Central, and it is, 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern. So until then, you guys have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you may be, and I send you all so much love and light. Thank you, Lionel.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Let's see. Joe likes to mess with me. We're still live. I'll know when he's on there because I can see him on the screen here. He does this to me all the time, and then he'll say, "You're clear." We're not clear yet. I know we're not, because he likes to. Everybody in the chat just loved you. Everybody.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to hear.
Progressive presents an interview with your upstairs neighbor.
My name's Barry. I live right above you. I don't host parties. I host after parties. They're like parties, only louder and nobody goes home. You can see right here I ripped out all the carpeting because it was holding me back with my pogo stick. Man's got a pogo. Oh, I'm a prankster. I'll grease up a soda can, and then when somebody grabs it, boom!
Progressive can't save you from your upstairs neighbor, but we can save you money when you bundle renters and auto insurance with us. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company, affiliates, and other insurers. Bundle discount not available in all states or situations.
Me, but also you. The Pharaoh fast forwards his favorite foreign film, Powder Donut. Okay, what's my line?
The only line I see here on the script is get options based on your budget with the name your price tool from Progressive.
Oh man, that's a tongue twister, huh? I'm sorry, I'm gonna need a few more minutes. Bulbous Walrus, the Bulbous Walrus.
The name your price tool, only from Progressive.
The owl ran afoul of the comatose coxswain.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.